All right, so hello everyone and welcome to Momentum Live. My name is Mo and we've got a very interesting show for you today. We've partnered with the Deal Desk Association to help you understand how to position Deal Desk as a strategic partner in your organization. So in today's show, you're going to learn three things. Number one, why moving the Deal Desk to a front row seat is critical to making data-driven go-to-market decisions. Two, will help you clarify what your focus should be as a deal desk leader and elevate your team from being quote jockeys to a mission critical part of the sales process. And three, will give you guidance on how to navigate deal desk leadership challenges, hiring, retention, and building the right culture. We'll be speaking to Vandana Nair, VP of RevOps at Narvar, and one of our previous attendees, one of our previous interviewees, so to speak. And we'll leave some time at the end for any questions from the panel. So let's get right to it. Vandana, how are you doing today?
I'm doing very well, Mo. I'm worse than usual in my technical abilities today. So apologies to keep you waiting. I think I've exhausted my mojo on Zoom this week from sales kickoff. So sorry about that.
Totally understood. I don't think it would be a webinar if there weren't some technical glitches. So I'm glad we've gotten that one out of the way. So we'll hop right into it. How do you think about, we've got a bunch of deal desk people in the crowd today, in the E crowd. How do you think about staffing a deal desk as you're building the organization? How do you think about headcount planning and things like that?
So deal desk is an interesting one, right? It's never just a formula as far as I'm concerned. What ends up happening is if you've got a high velocity sale, chances are that you've got systems in place that are going to let you get as far as you possibly can with just self-serve motions for your internal customers, as well as possibly external. And kind of put off, and companies feel like they can put off this function for a long time. So often you'll find with a high velocity, low ASP sort of situation where there's one deal desk person, and they're just keeping the boat afloat. More on that in a little bit, but let me address enterprise first. So if you have a long enterprise cycle, what I've noticed is what has worked for us at previous companies is as you scale along with the sales team. Typically, depending on how many contracts you do, and that often depends on how long the contracts are and how many upsell opportunities you have. That's usually a good formula to go with. Starting with one deal desk person for every 12 or so salespeople is not a bad idea. And then soon you start to get are the deals becoming more complex? Are the contracts getting more complex? And you start scaling based on that. Tickets cases are always a great way to see, as is just seeing if your team is struggling. You have to keep your finger on the pulse, right? Going back to high velocity, that's a little bit high velocity, low ASP sales. I think a lot of folks that I've worked with at Dropbox are experiencing that. You have to invest in the systems, because regardless of how many deal desk people you throw at it, the situation is going to end up being where they will be handicapped and they'll be system band-aids unless you fix the systems. So I'd say the way you'd look at that one, at least in my experience, has been you look at the systems, you make sure that your people are set up right. They're not suffering, so that they're not in turn taking the suffering to the external partners or the internal partners. And that's where I would start. I would start with 25 to 1 even, and then go from there.
25 to 1. So obviously that kind of a ratio requires someone to be at the very top of their game. How would you approach the hiring process for such a high performing deal desk professional? What are you looking for? What are you selecting for during the interview process?
So the first, when you're hiring for somebody that's going to be high touch, which is your enterprise, there's kind of a there's a different set of characteristics I think that you'd be looking for. Somebody that's high touch. What I personally would look for is someone that's highly empathetic, high EQ. Of course, has a head for contracts, and can't have wool pulled over their eyes in terms of what the different contractual terms should be. So definitely somebody who's sharp, somebody who's able to grok, hey, this has implications for revenue, or this has implications for this. So the first couple of hires I would make would be people that have done this job before, maybe one time at the very least, and high IQ, high empathy. Somebody that could grow into a manager role would also be very high on my list, because I'm a huge fan of promoting from within, and you want to promote the people that are loyal to the company, that come in, they help build. Finally, one thing I'll say is your first deal desk person, chances are they're not just going to do a deal desk job. So somebody that knows how to roll with the punches is not phased by entirely new scenarios. That would be immense for me. Now there's a whole, of course, we can talk for hours on how you test for something like that in an interview. You can only be as good as your questions at that moment. But yeah, for sure, it's something I would look for. In a more high velocity role, what I'd look for is serious system savviness. I mean, this is somebody who can lean in heavily for the systems team. Somebody that can say, how do I look at a particular situation and make this more self-serve? How do I make the experience be more frictionless from the customer's perspective themselves? Because I'm not going to be available to them as often as somebody that's in a high touch model will be available to them. So that's the sort of mindset I'd look for. Again, it needs to be somebody that's not phased by new sort of situations, but has to be like much more system savvy, I'd say.
Bit of a tangent on that. So if you think about the background of someone who ticks all those boxes, would you, I don't know, lean more towards someone who's got a legal background? Because that's essentially what you're asking for. Someone who can take the heat, who can work with systems, and who can look at the value that both sides are going to get. So I know people come into Deal Desk from all kinds of backgrounds. Which ones have you found in your experience are kind of a better fit, or mean that someone is going to kind of hit the ground running when they enter the role?
So actually, we've only, excuse me, in all my time, this working from home. Welcome to my life and my children.
Hey, you could bring them on the show even. That'll be perfectly fine.
Don't worry, they will be. I can hear the knob rattling right now. So legal, actually, it's funny, I remember only one person on my teams ever that came from a pure legal background. Archana, in case she's listening, she's actually gone back to doing family law now. But mostly, it's not people that come and join from a legal background. It's people that end up joining I've had people from accounting backgrounds, I've had people from FP&A backgrounds. I mean, I've straight up had people that have geology degrees. Anybody that has a logical bent of mind to be able to say that just doesn't look right, because there is a lot of on the job training that goes on for Deal Desk. And every company is different. What's acceptable at one company is not going to be acceptable in another company. So some companies that are just, and also, by the way, in the same company at different times, there's going to be things that are not acceptable versus acceptable. Like, when you're Series B, you could roll a little looser, with contracts, and you could be like, sure, we could give you that with just, a couple of words thrown into the contract. Whereas you're getting close to IPO, yeah, that's not going to work. So, and then public companies, oh my gosh, that's another ballgame entirely, right? So, I think that it's one of those situations where legal maybe, but for sure, if there's somebody out there that has a head for being able to see logical patterns in contracts and is sharp enough, and frankly is patient enough to be able to go through that, because you don't just jump into a Deal Desk team and within 15 days you're up and ready. You're not really a valued partner for 30, 60, 90 days, depending on the kind of deals that we do, right? So I'm telling you, I've had SDRs apply for this role, partner managers. I've had people go from this to become SDRs and partner managers, but all over the map.
Interesting. So for anybody who is currently watching this stream, if you've got any questions, please feel free to drop them in the Q&A section, and we'll pick them up later on after we've run through the questions with Vandana. So Vandana, going back to this Deal Desk process, where does the friction stem from in a sales process, and what can Deal Desk members do to mitigate where they can?
this goes back to the empathy and EQ thing that I was talking about. So friction, they I have to share this with you. One of the companies that I'm not sure if anybody from that company is actually on, but they'll know which one it is if they are. But way back when I started at this company, there were only a couple of us, and somebody, one of the RSDs, the regional sales directors, thought that, they cracked the joke of the century when they called us the deal prevention desk. And they were like, oh, this is the deal prevention desk. And I was just like, oh. But I mean, essentially, I say that to highlight the fact that a lot of times the deal desk bears the brunt because they are the face of a lot of the, I use the word objections loosely, but what I'm really trying to say is there's a certain degree of audit that needs to go into a deal, and the deal desk is the face of it. They're the front of it. So when somebody steps up and says something so supremely demotivating yet bizarrely funny to them, it just makes you wonder, like, wow, am I the person keeping this deal from happening? And the answer really is no. It's not just one person, it's not just one team. And friction can arise from any time, right? Like it can arise, gosh, I want to say at enablement, where you don't have sellers that are good enough at qualifying. You haven't trained them enough to qualify, or I've actually had situations where the methodology that we're giving the sales team is not right for the velocity or the ASP, or just the general deal motion. So there's, there could be that. It could be it could be having not enough resources on the solutions consultants side. I'd say in some cases, it could be that the solution consultants are needlessly being thrown into deals and adding friction when they're not, when, AEs are technically savvy enough, account executives are technically savvy enough to pick it up themselves. So, it could be a roles and responsibilities thing. It could also be simply that the contracts are not optimized. And I don't think that outside of the commercials, the deal desk really plays a huge part in formalizing the contracts. There's one of the companies I work for, one of the things that constantly got picked on were our acquisition and divestiture clauses. Constantly. And the fact of the matter is that the deal desk, even though they deal with it, they're not really the source. These clauses are written with very heavy legal considerations in mind. So, it takes more than just a deal cycle to fix them. It takes basically a group of people saying, what as a company do we stand for? What are we going to do? What are we going to allow a customer to do when they acquire a customer or they divest a company? So friction can arise from so many places, but fortunately or unfortunately, the deal desk gets to hear it all. And because that's just the final room, run of it, and people are just like, oh, I can taste it, it's going to happen, pen is poised over paper, why are you doing this to me right now? And it's too easy to think that it's the friction arises at the end. It doesn't. It arises in a lot of places. What the deal desk can do to mitigate is this. I think the deal desk is in the unique place to be able to, if they have the right amount of curiosity and they have the right mindset, they have the ability, I think, to educate themselves and that's where the deal desk ends up being a good partner, to basically be like, I know you think you can get that clause through, and it's looking great now that it's in stage 2 and we're only just sending out dummy contracts. But if I were you, I would rethink that one. And rethinking could be anything from, don't make sure you're not hiding this from the legal team until the very last second. It could be, make sure you're checking if procurement needs to be involved. A lot of newer AEs don't know that when they come to a new company, right? So the deal desk plays a huge part in onboarding some of these newer sellers and making the friction lower for them. I've rambled on this. You can imagine I have a lot of thoughts on this. I could go on, but tell me when I'm done answering your specific question.
Yeah, I was actually thinking about something that you mentioned, and I remembered our first interview. You were very quick with fault detection, so maybe you'll be able to help us answer this. You mentioned earlier on the ratios of deal desk professionals to sales professionals, right? You mentioned 1 to 12, 1 to 25. For someone in that role who's handling all these deals, especially say it's a high velocity deal desk, how will management know that this person is essentially drowning and that it's time to step in and maybe give them the help and support slash system slash review that they need? What are the telltale signs that there's a crack in the wall and we need to do something about it before it's too late?
So first off, Mo, the deal desk is one of those teams. I just don't see how you couldn't be personally connected with the team. If you're managing the team, even regardless of what level you're at managing the deal desk team, I don't see how you couldn't be personally connected to this team. It's impossible. You should be. You should know when your people are working absurd hours. You should know, and it comes from a lot of places, right? I've had situations where just seeing the nature of requests from sales, you've been able to tell, like, oh my god, this is I know this team, I know they can handle this, they're just not able to get to it. And that's a huge indication. And I say this because a lot of times they're just, the team could be going through something as a whole. I mean, god, they could be going through COVID. Like, imagine another pandemic, right? It's like people are at home, your kids crying, there's bunches of stuff. Now, do you need to hire up like 3 more people? Chances are that in normal circumstances, you would not be drowning, but you are drowning at that moment. So like I say, the personal connection is super important. The second thing is, these ratios are based on things like systems and processes working optimally. Now, if they're broken, right? If you've got some, like, say your IT team is the one that manages all your Salesforce implementations, and you've got, on the roadmap, you've got like, yeah, what I need is coming next month. Well, if that moves, right, because they have issues as well in terms of resourcing and they have their own road mapping concerns. If you find out that that's not going to happen for another 6 months, that 1 to 25 ratio, which assumes, by the way, that the deal desk person is not going to touch every deal. A high velocity deal essentially means that you'll touch 1 to 25 deals. Everything else will just kind of go through, right? So if there's suddenly, if the promised land is no longer around and you're not going to see what you're going to see, what you were expecting in the roadmap, it's time to reconsider. It's time to reconsider whether, whether you want to just staff, you don't want to wait for systems anymore. You want to staff this function and not be reliant on anybody else. That's a consideration that needs to happen. Because if you find it slipping more than once, it might be that it's not within the realm of possibility that you can rely on this roadmap anymore. And you want to ramp up. You want to make that 12 to 1 as well. The high velocity desk one, 12 to 1 as well. You could find that the nature of the business changes. Suddenly you've got, account executives handling renewals. Let me tell you, in that case, I would take the ratio down. I would make it very, very different. Renewals are a different beast. They're so tough. They're sometimes even tougher negotiations than the first time. I would really, really ramp up the deal desk in that time. So there's that. If you want to look at it from a data perspective, and if you really do think that there's a big enough team that you're removed enough from them and you don't have the ability, or the span of control is way too much for your first line managers, I would say putting in cases or putting in tickets is extremely important, because what that allows you to do is pinpoint trends. It basically, if something is coming up over and over and over and over again, you're just like, gosh, that is an enablement issue. And by enablement, I don't mean bring the enablement team and dump it in their lap. I mean, let's have a brown bag. Let's have a lunch and learn. Let's basically be like, guys, I see bunches and bunches of you are doing this wrong with the quote. This one thing, you're not picking the right price book. Let's do a 15-minute lunch and learn, and we'll work through this. That's a huge, huge part. Like the mitigating these issues when you notice trends like that is immense. So tickets have helped us in the past. Being personal connections have helped us. And one thing I will say is, regardless of regardless of what team you manage. It doesn't even matter. Like, you could be a leader at any level. You could be managing any number of people. You have to have your truth tellers. And that's where I think I go back to how, when you have like the 2 or 3 people in your team, things are not as formal. You want to pick somebody, you need to cultivate that. You need to cultivate that trust to be able to say, it doesn't matter if it's ugly. You need to come and tell me what it is. Is the team struggling? Is there toxicity in the team? Is there something going on with sales that they're not telling you because they think that it's not, it's too trivial, or they don't want to raise it? All these things have to happen. You have to have your, attended a course at Stanford once, and that you have to have your truth tellers. And Condoleezza Rice mentioned it in that. And I was like, yes, you have to have your truth tellers for sure.
And then, so we've got 2 questions here from, I believe from Mario. We're going to get to them in a little bit, but I wanted to come back to deal desk and go-to-market. So from a go-to-market perspective, what's the harm really in leaving the deal desk behind until it's too late? And why should this change in sales organizations?
So I'll tell you how I like to think of it, because I will tell you that I didn't just wake up one day and come up with this. I mean, I've had leaders in the past that have, that have shown me the path to this. So I know I'm not the only one out there that considers this. There's the way the deal desk sees deals and the way that the deal desk sees how business is done, nobody else does. I mean, sales does, but the average salesperson is not involved in the GTM strategy process as well, right? Their managers are. There's a lot of times, let me take one thing as an example, so I can be less general and be more specific. So during assignment of territories, we do this thing called white spacing. And white spacing essentially is to say, hey, let's look at all our existing customers. And these customers, we're going to go back into them, and we're going to see what white space we have in terms of products, and what white space we have in terms of upsell, in terms of their number of users. Say, for example, if you've got a land and expand model or some such thing, right? That is virtually that. Now, it's a numbers game as well. Like, you go back, you run your white space, you do your average selling price, and you run your numbers and stuff. But there's sometimes it is entirely impossible for you to know whether that will be successful unless you talk to the deal desk, because it could be that our contracts are written in a way where it doesn't really allow us to monetize in the way that the analysts are thinking about it. That's one thing. The other thing could be, I would say, like, what do you Mo, when you run across a really good sale, what do you do? I'll tell you what I do. I tell everybody that will listen. I kid you not, I'm out there, banners in hand, like, Macy's just hit Macy's up, they're doing this. That's the same in sales. Like, you find a way to do a deal that is appealing to a particular customer, and salespeople also like to share, right? They're also like, they've got their peer group, and they're like, hey, this really works well. If you tell them that you're selling product A, but then you'll sort of give them a trial of product B for a certain amount of time. I'm just using something entirely random, which hopefully doesn't actually happen very much, because mixing the 2 contracts is pain in the behind. But imagine do something like that. And then you've got analysts that are disconnected with the deal desk, that are thinking that they're going to on day 1 be able to sell this product for a certain amount of money. Well, that's not going to work, right? Because now what you haven't taken into account is the customer has essentially a 6-month freebie of that product. So it's things like these, not involving the deal desk, not really knowing how contracts are done. I'll give you another example. There are situations where companies like to say that we'll sell you a big number of users, but we'll only activate you for a certain amount of users, and we'll grow with you, so that you're not, if a new user comes on, you're not blocked, and you're not waiting for our people to activate you. But at the same time, we'll true you up every quarter, every month, whatever your cadence is. Well, imagine if you basically said your new strategy was, the moment we sell, we're going to automatically activate 20% more, right? Because that's what we're noticing. The trend is that people are looking, as soon as we activate people, about 20% in the year activate themselves. We're going to activate that, or just and go for the adoption numbers right away. The deal desk will be able to tell you if the contract is written in a way that if you do that, it opens up the floodgate for the entire amount that you've given them. And nobody wants to be billed for that, Mo. I'm a buyer. I don't want to be billed for that. First month arrives and I'm like 8x the budget that I had. No, that's not going to work. So it's impossible to be thinking how the company's business is going to work in the next year and the next fiscal period without really consulting with the people that see the way that the business is done. That's my view and my opinion on why deal desk they should be heavily consulted and have a seat at the table.
Definitely a critical element of any go-to-market strategy. And coming back to the individual themselves, how should deal desk professionals think about their career paths? What options do they have over time?
I've had people, like I said, I've had people come from various backgrounds. I've had people go to various backgrounds. So we've had so people that, and again, I say it's like, if certainly, shout out if somebody from one of my past colleagues is on here, and but I've had people go to become channel partner managers, SDRs. We actually had a deal desk a sales ops manager go on to become an RSD. So actually, it's not surprising to have deal desk people go into sales, and because they want to follow the CRO path. Eventually some people want to follow the COO path. So in a smaller company, if you have the ability to do deal desk and then move on to sales strategy, and then maybe move on to marketing ops, you're kind of like traversing that path of going up into becoming a more of a COO function. Certainly people that are on the CRO route, it's important for them to be able to know, what the deal desk does and have some, just have some reality around, what their people are facing. Because I will tell you that sometimes sales leaders are disconnected with what the AEs want. It's true. It's just they suffer the same situation as the rest of us. That it's once you get to a certain level of disconnectedness from the feet on the street, this is a challenge that we all face, right? So I've had AEs, I've had renewals. Renewals is a big one. Sorry, I forgot I didn't mention that. Oh my gosh. Deal desk people can do astoundingly well as renewals AEs. They're so good because they know the contract in and out. And I've had people go and run renewals teams from the deal desk, and I'm so proud of them, because it's just one of those things that nobody knows. No, you want that person by your side when you're doing a renewals contract. So this SDR, AE, renewals. You could become a deal desk manager. You could become marketing ops or sales strategy. I feel like there's nowhere you can't go once you understand what is important to the company, what is important to the business, and how business is done.
So you're talking about that disconnect. How then do we bridge that gap and get a deal desk and sales leadership and revenue leadership to understand exactly what people need and to provide them with the support they need at the deal desk level?
You're talking about, when you say revenue leaders, talking about sellers, right?
Yeah. So, you mentioned, that once you reach a certain level, a lot of sales leaders, a lot of deal desk leaders, maybe at the very highest end of the executive level, they forget or they just become disconnected from what deal desk needs. So from a support perspective, how can deal desk management and how can company management as a whole provide that much needed support?
There's two aspects to this actually that I touched on. One of them is sales management becoming disconnected with what sales wants. And it's this happens actually not for deals. This happens more for where their people need to brush up their skills. And it becomes a matter of sales leaders asking for things or putting pressure on the deal desk to do things a certain way. Whereas if you just sort of like logically follow the path back, this could have been avoided with proper training. So there's that aspect, and this is where I do think, and I'll come back to this in a second, but let's also discuss the disconnectedness between say somebody that's now managing more than the deal desk and now is somewhat disconnected with the day-to-day of the deal desk, which unfortunately happens. Um, the first line deal desk managers are critical, are absolutely critical, as are first line sales managers. So that's where I think the most important feedback comes from, because it's more than just your day-to-day, it's more than just a day-to-day reaction to events. It's more of a pattern, more of a trend, more of a, oh, I'm not just hearing this from person A, I'm hearing this from multiple people, person B. It's not just a problem with this vertical, it's a problem with multiple people. The first line deal desk manager is critical in terms of giving feedback to both the sales management as well as their management. It's a very difficult job. Just like I think the most difficult job in sales is being a first line manager. And I'll tell you why. It's you find yourself sandwiched between the needs of your people, which cannot be trivialized at all. This is a hardworking team in most places that I've ever seen, and they're not just sitting around at any company. They're working hard. They're really busting their behind. And then you've got situations where, frankly, there's a number to be met, and you're not. You don't, in some cases, have the luxury of being able to look at every deal and every case for only its own self. So it's one of those places where you have to be able to learn to aggregate the stimulus and the data and be able to present it in a way that makes logical sense to sales, and it makes logical sense to your management. As an example, if you're finding that there's a particular tactic that's working well for sales, and sales management has their own version of how things should work, and they do. A lot of times they're like, no, I want you to go back and push on this particular clause or this particular part of the contract, and the AE is like, it ain't working. And let me tell you, the first person that hears about this is the deal desk. So there's that, right? There's one aspect is when you have a QBR, the deal desk should have a portion in it to be like, hey, this quarter, what we noticed was this was a big point of friction. Sales management, take note. Deal desk management, revenue operations management, take note that this is working in this way, but it took 30% more time or 30% more resources for us to get there. So you need to pay attention to this. Like, if we're going to ever have a headcount planning cycle in the next 1 month, 2 weeks, whatever it's taking, like as how quickly is the team's resources depleting, this is something you need to pay attention to. So, they kind of have this two-pronged thing, and it's the health of the team is the responsibility of the first line manager, right? And people have to listen. If they don't listen, this is a very key and critical resource that you're going to be out of.
I see. So feedback should definitely go both ways.
I think so. Yeah.
So we've got some questions from the guests. Marie Fleming is asking, would one of the first priorities in establishing a deal desk be to communicate roles and responsibilities, and also explaining the value add of having deal desk involved, and finally requiring a seat at the table when decisions are being made, example, systems, authority, processes? So I think some of these questions have been answered. But probably the most pertinent one would be, how do you establish roles and responsibilities as you're establishing a deal desk? How do you communicate that?
Yeah, that's extremely, actually, that is, it depends on the size of the company. And it's like I said, if it's a super small company, the expectation, unfortunately, is that you're going to have somebody that their main role is to be responsive to sales. And just get the contract out as quickly as possible, and that's that. And that can actually become pretty difficult. The establishment of roles and responsibilities can actually get easier as you get bigger, because it's not just about the deal desk; it's the ancillary functions that are also being formed, right? So, for example, the deal desk is not working. Is right now they don't have enough people in accounting, or they don't have enough people, to actually answer questions on revenue recognition, and the deal desk is kind of getting all the pressure. Well, as the company gets bigger, you may have somebody actually dedicated to you on the accounting or sales finance team, and you're able to answer these questions, direct those questions to them. So earlier on, it's going to be a little bit of hybrid role that is expected, and it becomes more important to say, this is not what the deal desk can do, this is what the deal desk can do. And the roles and responsibilities will differ for everybody, right? Like I said, in a high velocity sort of situation, one of the first things to assess as when you get into the situation or when you get into that company as a leader, the first thing to assess is, run me through what the cycle is. Who does what? Like, what is the sales process? What is the sales cycle? Tell me from the customer's perspective, down from the external to the internal, to the back end people. What is the process? Who does what? Lay it out for me. Once you're able to lay that out, you actually be able to figure out, like, what is the nature of person I want to hire in this role? B, what is when I communicate with sales management, what will I say in terms of when the involvement will begin? For myself versus enablement, versus like any other team that's involved. Like one thing I'll tell you right now, we don't have enough people hired up in the sales ops function at Narvar right now. So people are asking the deal desk to move territories for them, and that's not their job. So, it took us, after the first few times of them moving accounts for people, they finally, we were just like, no, stop, like, just stop. Not that we have other people to do this, but from a principal perspective, I would say, send them to me and I will do it versus the deal desk doing it, because their role has to be clearly defined. They have to be these people that are not catch-alls. So it's very important to have guardrails. The people that can help very heavily with this are legal. It has to be very clearly defined with legal and with finance, what deal desk can approve versus not approve. And that will grow, by the way, with trust. That will grow exponentially with trust. Deal desk will be able to pick on more things from, from RevRec and from legal as time goes on. But these teams have to help you define it, because guess what? If you're not doing it, they are. So they also need to be shown some empathy here. Like, what are their resourcing like, So that's what I would say. I would say you're not the only one defining roles and responsibilities. Extremely important in smaller companies and easier in somewhat bigger companies. And your partners have to be your partners, legal, RevRec. And then finally, your sales management has to be laid out. It has to be laid out in a clear manner.
And speaking of resources, so we've got another question from Marie. She asks, how do you create a succession plan to keep deal desk resources available?
Yeah, that's very close to my heart, Marie. Thank you for asking that question. This is what actually, one of the things I'd meant when I was saying that, like, you want to think about the first couple of people you want to hire are a bonus point is always if you see them as people that you can grow into leaders. Because these are people that are going to be in the trenches with you at times when nobody's going to know how to build, how to set up a contract. I mean, chances are this person's coming in, the two of you are actually creating your first order form together, like what should be on there and stuff like that, right? It's what shouldn't be on there is probably what I should say. But it's, these sorts of things. I mean, what's the best way to have a succession plan is to grow that succession plan, is to get somebody who's promising, somebody who you think can really show promise and really kind of invest in them. And you have to invest in people. Like one mistake that I made myself, and one mistake I've seen made is people saying like, oh, that person doesn't have leadership qualities. Well, heck, like nobody's like, there are very few people that are just born in the cradle with leadership qualities, right? It's like, and people mistake what leadership qualities are. Like, I mean, leadership is not about like saying that way, I'm holding the flag, follow me. It's also about what do your people want, and that takes some errors, whether you like it or not, right? So it's important, I think, like, you may see this person as like, oh, they're a great individual contributor, but can they really, do people want to be managed by them? No. It's your job to make sure that people want to be managed by them. You grow them.
It's that thing of errors and empathy. I remember during my first interview, I asked you, what would you be looking for in a deal desk leader? And you said, you want someone who's taken a few blows in the role over time, because then they know exactly what to expect, and they know how to bounce back from these setbacks. And so leadership, one could say, is a function of you having been through the trenches, and so which then gives you the empathy to know whether or when your team is going through the trenches, and B, how to support them in that role. And also having the
connectedness. Well, that helps with
Yeah.
that as well, right? Because you don't have to be intellectually thinking about like, oh, what could that problem be? You know what that problem is.
You can sense it. You can feel
Right.
it. Yeah. Yeah. And then Victoria asks, she says she's loving this so far. Thanks so much, Victoria, for tuning in, by the way. She asks, any words of advice or guidance for someone who's building and growing a deal desk function from scratch? So I think we've answered this again in some of the previous questions, but if you could give a top line summary, what pieces of advice would someone like Victoria need in that situation?
Yeah, definitely. So when you're building from scratch, first off, I mean, when you say scratch, I'm assuming that there's not going to be a deal desk person hired into a company that has done no sales. Like that's kind of virtually impossible, at least in my world. Maybe I'm just way too narrow in my view. The chances are that some deals have been done. The founder sold some stuff, the CTO has cornered somebody at an airport or something like that. Something has gone on, some piece of paper has been signed, be it a bar napkin or whatever. The first thing I think to come in and see is what is the nature of doing business. Like I said, right? You come in, you're like, is there a process? The one thing I've learned, and Mo, you and I talked about this before, is people tend to say there's no process. No, there is a process. That non-process process is a process. You think that getting up from your desk and getting a paper towel and signing it is not a process. It's a process. So what is that process? And figuring out, once you actually do that, figuring out like what do I need? What are the steps I need? And this is where legal can help you. What are the things we need to protect the company? What are the things that we need to actually put on this piece of paper so accounting can invoice them? Once you have this list of essentially what is jobs to be done out of this particular sales process, these are all the things that need to happen. Forecasting needs to be done because, well, we have to tell somebody somewhere who's put money into us, how we're going to give them ROI on that, right? Once all this stuff is done, once the jobs to be done are put down, you put responsibilities and roles of responsibilities of who should do that. Creating an MSA from scratch, a subscription agreement from scratch, likely not the job of the deal desk. You want to put legal against that. Once you have that in place, and that's where roles and responsibilities lie, you start hiring. Your first hire, like I said, should be somebody, and I've already parroted this a couple of times, so I won't belabor that. But one thing I will say is, if you're going to be in the trenches with somebody, never lose sight of the fact that you have to be able to trust this person completely. Be 100% selfish when it comes to somebody you can trust, because when it's just the one or two of you, it's very, very difficult you have to load balance. One of you cannot be in the situation where you're like constantly checking the other person's work. Like, oh, did it get done? Did it get done? So you have to optimize for that. And you have to be able to say, I got this. We together have got this. You don't need to come to me every time, sales manager. You can go to this person. I trust them completely. So start off with looking at what the process is. Try to see where you can put improvements in place, put jobs to be done, put people against that, start looking at the resourcing that you need, start hiring based on that. And then the moment you hire the first person, take their feedback, listen to them. They might have something to say that's actually way wiser than what you can possibly think. You're in it together now. So yeah, and then build your tribe. That's what I would say. Build your tribe, get legal on your side, get RevRec on your side. A lot of times these functions are even more misunderstood than the deal desk. And you want to be sure that you have that strong tribe to be able to say, let's first agree on the fact that we want business. Like, we're not in the business of turning away business. So how do we make this happen? Like, how do we look at a contract and say, possible, but not probable? Or do we say, oh, possible and probable? Like, what are those things, the check marks that we can go through to say, let me talk to legal about this. I think we can make it happen if we make these changes. That's how you become the partner to both sides that both sides need.
Yeah, Mary says she agrees that trust is critical and that you should definitely hire someone who builds on any weaknesses that you may have, because then sharing the load becomes easier. So we've got a question, a couple questions from Thomas, John, and then one from Deepa. I think we'll then take that and then we'll close it out because we've got about 10 minutes. So with Thomas, he asks, what, according to you, are the key KPIs for deal desk teams to measure performance?
This is actually, deal desk is one of those situations where, again, first I go back to what kind of deal cycle do you have? If it's a deal cycle that's high velocity and the team is only touching very small portions of the deal, it's far easier to go with cases and to be able to say, with this improvement, with this turn of the dial, I can improve 20%, deal cases. And be very, if you're going to set that up, be very specific, very, very specific. Because one mistake I think that, God, we've all made is to be super generic in our cases, to be super generic in our tickets, if you will, right? However the company wants to refer to them, which is to say, let me give you an example. One of them is saying you have one drop down that says help with deal closure. Okay, that's great. The issue is that any number of things are going to come up at the time the deal closes. Is it a problem with validation rules in Salesforce? Is that the issue? Is the problem that we haven't been able to pinpoint win-loss reasons? Is that the problem? Is the problem that there's contractual issues that happen at the end? Is that the issue? Is the problem that, at the last minute, there are issues with invoicing that the customer suddenly has thrown a loophole for? Which one is it? Err on the side of picking 6 or 7 really important ones that show you a pattern. Put that in place. Never put the deal desk in a position where you're giving them a goal like reduce tickets by 20%, and they're generic ass tickets. It was like, how? Like, you're hiring 30% more salespeople and you want me to reduce the tickets by 20%? That's like, my 8-year-old will tell you that math is wrong, right? So like, pick the right things that you're going to goal the team on. This can also work for enterprise, but typically if it's so high touch, you're going to find that the needle isn't moved that much on the number of tickets or some such thing, right? I think there need to be a little bit more qualitative measures. It can't only be quantitative. A lot has to do with feedback from customers, and feedback in a way that is not overwhelmingly personal. So, a quarterly survey might help. That's something that, you can, and you don't want to change the questions up every time, because then there's no trending, right? There's like, essentially, but did we help you with this? Did we help you with that? What did you find that this was the case? Second thing I think is to actually have very measurable things. Like, for example, one of the things we're doing right now is rolling out momentum for approvals. We've been hearing over and over again, non-standard approvals are a problem. They're a problem. We know they're a problem. They're also a problem for us. So, now we're basically saying, okay, you know what? Here's a roadmap. We've heard you. Here's a roadmap of 5 things we're going to do from a deal desk and from a systems team's perspective. And we're going to roll this out at this time. Adherence to that roadmap, making sure that people are trained properly, making sure that there's right FAQs and having the right knowledge base from the deal desk. And then, basically seeing like, all right, if we have this one thing, how many times did it get asked at the beginning of the quarter? How many times did it get asked at the end of the quarter? And then, something like this, I'll tell you, for approvals, the Slack, integration that we're doing with Momentum, a lot of it is going to end up being qualitative. It's not going to end up being that quantitative. So it's, like I say, the connectedness, the finger on the pulse, extremely important. It's not just a numbers game.
So we're going to take one more from Thomas, and then we're going to go to Deepa. So Thomas asks, when companies go through mergers and acquisitions, what is the immediate and long-term impact to deal desk team in your experience? So maybe we can answer that real quick and then jump to Deepa's question.
I have to admit that I have not been through a merger and acquisition myself. I've been through IPO a couple of times. And it's, so I feel like I'm not adequately qualified to answer what happens to a deal desk during an acquisition or a merger. I will say one thing. Whenever we have acquired a company, like I personally have not been part of a company that has been acquired, but when we have acquired a company at previous companies, the first thing you want to do is you want to put that, regardless of reporting lines, you want to put their deal desk in your meetings. You want to build a connection, because a lot of times companies will hold that particular business unit separate, and they'll want to run it, they'll want to see what the revenue potential is. The GTM motion might be different. Your persona that you're selling to might be different. A lot of things that need to come together for this company to actually be fully integrated. But the one thing you want to start doing right away is start looking at what their sales motion is and bringing this person in. Are there things you can learn from them? Are there things that they can learn from you? Because eventually you want to plan for the fact that your sales process is going to be essentially the same. And you don't want that to end up being dumped in your lap with, another fiscal year looming and 30 days to get done in place. So that's extremely important. And that I think is one piece of information that I would really like to throw out there. From a systems perspective, which impacts the deal desk a lot, I would start looking at what does the deal desk actually do. A lot of times you acquire smaller companies that don't really have a sales force instance that well defined, so they're happy to take on whatever you're doing. But in some cases they do. And eventually, if this deal desk is going to move under you, and you're going to build a deal desk that handles both the companies or both ways of doing business, you want to make sure that you're familiarizing yourself with what needs to be incorporated if there's one system. Like what could you be missing out? What are the downstream impact if you try to strong arm, your thing to them, your process on them, or some such thing. So those would be my logical pieces of advice there, knowing that we certainly haven't been an Oracle that's acquired a PeopleSoft. That's nothing like that there.
Bring them in early, integrate systems, and get their input on all decisions going forward. I think that's solid. And then we've got one from Deepa. She says, there's so many applications and software systems available to aid deal desk. How do you choose which ones are the best ones for your team?
This is, and you can, Deepa, if you are currently in the position that I have been in the past, where you are being helped by sales to tell you what you should be putting in place, I hear you if you're in that position. To me, it's all about needs assessment. It's about needs assessment, plain and simple, because you know what? You could have the glitziest systems in the world out there, and they don't work for you. They just they just don't work for you. They work for somebody else, right? The first thing you need to do is talk to people that are going to be using the deal desk. And by the way, the deal desk doesn't need systems for themselves. The deal desk needs systems to serve other members of their internal customers. Get them both in, get a needs assessment in place, then start thinking about vendors against these, and prioritize these needs, right? Because the one thing that people like to do when you ask them about their needs is people like to tell you everything, every single thing. And in some cases, they're going to be very, very thoughtful about like, hey, these are my must-haves, these are my nice-to-haves. In some cases, you have to make the assessment. You're going to have to look at it and be like, yeah, I mean, that notification, the 5th notification, we could do without that. So, that is key to me. If we're not doing needs assessment, if we're going with the shiny objects, which by the way, mea culpa, I've done this myself, it's likely that you're going to be one of their churn customers in year 2. So, you just want to avoid that.
Guilty as charged. I think we've got time for one more question. So this goes back to Thomas John. Deepa, I hope that answered your question, by the way. So Thomas says, what are the various aspects that you think can increase deal velocity?
Gosh, I wish the deal desk was the one that actually could be the one that impacts this. There are a number of things, I think, and then that needs to be studied. Every company has their own sales process, right? Like, I mean, I would say I work normally with a 7 to 8 stage process. Some companies might say, that's too much. Our deals are so self-serve and they're so small and they're so SMB that we use a 4-stage process or 2-stage process. Your renewal stages might not be the same as your net new stages. So the way to improve deal velocity could be different for every company. To me, I mean, I feel like I'm harping on this, but I hope that my point is coming across on this. What is done in each stage is extremely important, and who does it is extremely important. Sometimes the best way to improve deal velocity is to change the person doing them. Like I said, the sales consultants or the sales solutions consultants, I know every company calls them something different, and the AEs. Sometimes like one of the things I remember at a company that I worked for, a generic demo. Literally, account executives would wait for technical resources to do generic demos. There's deal velocity increase for you right there. Like if you could train, and this was not a difficult product to use. You know, you have to show an admin screen and like so on and so forth. Customers were asking for a not 30-minute demo. They were asking for, hey, dude, can you just share your screen super quick and like show me this? Empower, like figure out where you can find these sorts of optimizing, activities and do it. Can you have your SDRs qualify a bit more for AEs, right? If so, make them do it. And you know what the bonus will be? That you'll have a much, much richer pool of people waiting to become sales at the time that you want to amp up your sales numbers. So it's not, I wish the deal desk was the most difficult part of the deal. It's not. But yeah, I mean, God, could the deal desk do things? Sure. I mean, here's one thing that we're doing right now. We're looking at our approval matrix again and basically just going through and having a come to Jesus moment. Like, do we really need approval for blah? And this is a conversation with our CFO and our CCO. And if the answer is going to be like, I'm kid you not, sometimes the answer is, I don't know, what do you think? I already know what I think. I think it shouldn't be, right? So then maybe then you're in an advisory position to say, how about we set a check? We let them pilot 60 days of not having an approval and see where it goes. How bad do the deals get? Let's give it a shot. So that would be my advice. Although I hate that word because honestly, I feel it's like advice is something that people don't use and like to pass on. That is my experience, I should say, Thomas.
Well, hopefully the people who are watching this stream right now have taken the advice to heart and they're going to implement some aspect of it, and it's going to give them a lot of value. We've reached the top of the hour. We've actually gone about 2 minutes over. Vandana, thank you so much for making the time to share your insights with us. And for everybody who joined us today, I hope you got many of your questions around how to manage deal desk answered. This has been a fantastic session. We've learned about why deal desk needs to be critical. It needs to have a front row seat when making data-driven go-to-market decisions. We've learned about how we can take deal desk professionals from being quote jockeys to being superstar members of any sales organization. And we've also gotten some guidance on how to navigate deal desk leadership challenges like hiring, retention, and building a culture. I'm seeing some positive feedback comments in the chat box. That's fantastic. I'm so happy you guys enjoyed it. Please click the link I've dropped in the chat, momentum.io, to learn more about what Momentum does and how it assists with sales automation and deal desk management. From myself, Mo, and the Momentum team, Ariel and Mario, we'll catch you guys next time. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.